Hello, I'm Jin, and in this video, I'll be doing a rundown of key events in Diablo's lore, from the very beginning to the hero's arrival in Tristram, which kicked off the games we know and love. Here we go. In the beginning, there was a singular pearl, within which Anu, the first being in creation, existed in an eternal dreamlike state. Anu encompassed everything, good and evil, the light and the darkness, the physical and the mystical. After a time, Anu sought a state of purity, and after a period of contemplation, cast all evil from itself, and the dissonance within was gone. This evil that was cast aside, these discordant parts, formed into another being, which was known as Tathamet, a terrifying seven-headed dragon. It was the total sum of all evil, the prime evil. Although now separated, they were still bound within the pearl, and waged war against each other for ages uncounted, neither able to gain an upper hand. Countless millennia passed before their energies were spent and they delivered their final blows. These energies unleashed ignited an explosion of light and matter from which the very universe itself was born. The spine of Anu spun out across creation and over countless ages cooled, becoming the crystal arch where angels are birthed through the light song, and around which the high heavens took shape and form. Tathamet's giant, blackened, smouldering husk fell down into the darkness of existence, where from his rotten flesh the realms of the burning hells formed. It's there, from the black abyss, demons of all shapes and sizes spawned into existence, like maggots from a corpse. The seven heads of Tathamet spawned the great evils. The three stronger heads gave birth to the prime evils: Mephisto, the lord of hatred; Baal, the lord of destruction; and Diablo, the lord of terror. The weaker four heads gave birth to the lesser evils: Andariel, the maiden of anguish; Asmodan, the lord of sin; Belial, the lord of lies; and Duriel, the lord of pain. Shortly after angels and demons came into creation, the eternal conflict, otherwise known as the Great Conflict, began. The high heavens were led by the Angelus Council, a collection of archangels created from the purest expression of the crystal arch's intrinsic harmony, and they believed that creating absolute order would be the only way to govern the realms. The five original members of the council each represented an aspect of Anu. There was Auriel, Archangel of Hope; Imperius, Archangel of Valor; Ethereal, Archangel of Fate; Malthael, Archangel of Wisdom; and Tyrael, Archangel of Justice. The great evils opposed these thoughts and were of the belief that chaos and darkness were at the core of all things, which left heaven and hell clashing and battling for dominion. The war mainly took place within the realm of Pandemonium, which lay at the epicenter of reality, a scar and a reminder of the universe's violent birth from the battle between Anu and Tathamet. It is the crossroads for the domains of all beings. As such, also connects the high heavens to the burning hells. At its core laid the Worldstone, the main points of contention within the conflict, as whoever controlled it would possess near limitless ability to shape reality, the power to create life, and even entire worlds. The forces of heaven and hell would alternate in taking control of the Worldstone, the heavens using its power to create worlds of perfect order, and the demons creating worlds of destruction, terror, and hatred. Though none of these worlds, neither heavens nor hells, ever managed to flourish, or even maintain, each withering and dying as the war raged on. At some point, during Heaven's control of the Worldstone, Tyrael ordered a stronghold to be built around it. This came to be known as the Pandemonium Fortress. Control too of this fortress changed hands many times over the conflict's course, and as the fighting dragged on, the desire to control the Worldstone's power persisted for both heaven and hell. According to Tyrael, this desire poisoned the stone's very nature. Shortly after, an advisor to the Angelus Council, the Archangel Inarius, grew tired and disillusioned with the eons of conflict. He had witnessed countless acts of brutality, leading him to the conclusion that the war was unjust, and his part in it had come to an end. He began searching for others that felt the same as him, as he thought he could not be alone in the conclusion that he had reached. He thought that other angels, and even demons, must want an escape from this never-ending war. Inarius led a skirmish from an outpost of the Pandemonium Fortress. He was wounded and marooned during a charge against demons and passed out, awakening to find himself in chains. He ranted about his dreams of escaping the war, and to his surprise, his captor released him. She revealed her name to him and told him that they would meet again. Her name was Lilith, daughter of Mephisto. She had suffered from her father's hatred and had long awaited an opportunity for rebellion. Inarius was captivated by the demon, and it was not long after this that they joined forces, each pledging themselves to the other and vowing to escape the eternal conflict forever. Over time, like-minded angels and demons joined Inarius' cause, and he planned their next step, securing the Worldstone. Through misdirection or battle, he and his renegades gained access to the stone at the heart of the Pandemonium Fortress. Inarius then altered the dimensional alignment of the Worldstone, using its power to conceal it from all angels and demons still involved in the eternal conflict, and shifted the stone into a pocket dimension where he and his followers shaped a protective shell around it, taking the shape of a mountain, later known as Mount Adria. From there, the rest of the world was formed. Inarius named this world Sanctuary. During this shaping process, Inarius fooled his followers, tying the Worldstone's power to himself, enhancing his already substantial powers unimaginably, making him the most powerful being on Sanctuary and the de facto ruler. Together with Lilith, they ruled with a council of both angels and demons, within a structure later known as the Temple of the Firstborn. The actions of Inarius, Lilith, and their followers led to confusion within the forces of both heaven and hell, as they became aware of the Worldstone's disappearance. They were puzzled as to how such a powerful and ancient relic had suddenly vanished without a trace. Without the Worldstone, the great conflict temporarily ceased, as the object of great power that had been central to their fight for eons was lost to them. Inarius and Lilith had done the impossible, forming an alliance of both angels and demons under them and creating a world where they could coexist. Eventually the two mated, creating the first of an entirely new entity. They named him Lunarian. He would later be known as Rathma. In time, other angels and demons followed suit, producing offspring of their own. These children, born of angel and demon, would be known as Nephilim. The first generation of Nephilim were known as the Ancients. They explored the world and fostered the cultures that would shape the generations to follow. They were much more powerful than their human descendants and even their progenitors. The angels and demons feared they may pose a threat to them, or even draw the attentions of heaven and hell to their world, with dire consequences, as the Angiris Council and the Prime Evils would consider this union of angels and demons blasphemous. Conflict began within the ranks of the renegades, as some argued for the Nephilim's destruction, others advocating for them to be spared, and so Inarius called for a period of reflection. Tentatively, his followers obeyed. Lilith saw the Nephilim as not only Sanctuary's future, but a means of ending the eternal conflict forever, and also serving as her personal soldiers. She morphed into a horrific new form, and began hunting her fellow renegades, angel and demon alike, murdering them all ruthlessly. Discovering the carnage Lilith had wrought, Inarius was horrified, and brought her to heel. He couldn't bring himself to kill the demon that had once captivated him, and had promised to never strike her down, nor let another do so. He decided to instead banish her to the void for all eternity. In the aftermath, Inarius found himself left with the Nephilim, a race which he now thought of as abominations, and he sought to reduce their power at all costs. He attuned the Worldstone in a way which would diminish the Nephilim's power over time, as he was unable to bring himself to harm them outright, and issued a clear warning to the Ancients: if they used their powers, they would be punished, insisting that his world would remain as he envisioned it. Although some Nephilim protested, those who challenged Inarius directly were crushed, and the survivors fled as their powers waned. It was also around this time that a mysterious dragon-like being named Tragul entered Sanctuary. This being was the first to understand the balance and what was needed to maintain it. Tragul had materialized in Sanctuary for only a few seconds, but that was long enough for it to lay the groundwork which would lead to his eventual discovery by Rathma. After this, Inarius disappeared, and with each subsequent generation of Nephilim, their powers diminished, forming a weaker mortal race known as humanity. Millennia pass, and humans populate the world, birthing various civilizations which spread far and wide over Sanctuary. The first of these civilizations was the Cain. These civilizations were vibrant and thriving, with writing, art, and science becoming an integral part of human culture. Some humans even developed arcane abilities and sensed the nodes of magical energy that Cain's jungles are rife with. These individuals formed groups and would settle in these areas, learning from them what they could. Over the next century, Cain would formalize the study of magic, leading to the formation of the Mage Clans, with each clan adhering to a particular school of magic. The clans grew rapidly in power and status, and each formed their own ethnically and culturally distinct societies with their own laws, customs, artisans, and merchants. Though only the clan's mages would study their particular vocation, the influence of each clan pervaded all corners of society. The exponential growth of the clans in both number and power gave them political influence over Cain, leading to the formation of the Aurakish, a council consisting of several Mage Clan members, which ruled Cain alongside the kingdom's monarchy and powerful trade guilds. Despite the prejudice the clans had for each other and the violent feuds between them, the council thrived for generations, and eventually, even the rulers of Cain became nothing more than their puppets. In time, one of the most prominent mage clans, the Bestiary Mage Clan, were convinced that spirits dwelled on Sanctuary and beyond, yet found themselves unable to communicate with them. However, they believed that communing with these entities was possible, and were driven to perfect the art of conjuring and summoning, researching and experimenting these arts extensively. But even so, they heard nothing but whispers from beyond. Centuries passed, and a young Bestiary acolyte named Harash, a forgettable member of the clan, aspired to represent them on the Mage Council, though he was outshone by his more talented peers, leading to growing frustrations. These frustrations came to a head when, during a short-lived feud between the Bestiary and the Amulet clan, his parents and sister were killed. This unleashed a rage inside Harash, who reached out to the spirit realms and succeeded where his contemporaries failed, summoning an entity to Sanctuary. This entity, however, was no spirit. He had summoned a demon. Harash acted quickly, recognizing what he had done, and the demon's malicious intent. He quickly bound it with magic before swiftly informing the Bestiary elders of what had happened. The Bestiary masked the truth of these events and fabricated false texts, claiming they were merely communing with spirits. Thus, they could then claim innocence of any wrongdoing should their actions lead to disaster. The Bestiary, thanks to the actions of Harash, quickly mastered this art and learned to enslave the minions of hell. They grew more arrogant and confident, thinking that if they could control one demon, they could control others, and began to summon demons more and more frequently in ever-increasing numbers, in the hopes of learning more about the universe and magic. Unbeknownst to them, these actions had dire consequences, as the burning hells were alerted to Sanctuary's existence. Even without that knowledge, there was conflict within the Bestiary concerning the summonings, some arguing that the demons were uncontrollable, posing a threat to the world, and others wanting to perfect their art. The Prime Evils recognized the strategic value of Sanctuary and crafted a plan to gain a decisive advantage within the great conflict. They opted for a subtle approach as to not alert the high heavens of Sanctuary's existence. Mephisto sent his son, Lucion, to establish a cult that would be known as the Triune. Their message was that through selfless worship and devotion, one could improve their lot in life. They preached peaceful resolution to conflict and empowered individuals over the whole. Their following quickly grew, having temples in many major settlements and slowly turning humanity to the side of evil. The Triune consisted of 3 smaller cults, one for each of the 3 guiding spirits, which of course were the alter egos of the 3 prime evils. This was not Sanctuary's only problem. Lilith had somehow returned from her banishment to the Void, but decided not to reveal herself to humans, instead secretly altering the Worldstone with a spell, allowing humans to develop their Nephilim powers once more. Over half a century, the Triune grew in status and following, but Anarius, however, still watched over his world, and in time became aware of the Triune. He became fearful for the safety of himself and his adopted children should heaven also become aware of their existence, reigniting the great conflict, and with that, dooming Sanctuary. He took on the mantle of the prophet to counter the Triune, creating a counter-sect he would call the Cathedral of Light, that preached the teachings of the light. And so a new war began, a secret war fought with manipulation, lies, and subterfuge, with the souls of humanity as the prize. Over the following decades, the Cajan society was polarized by the rise of these two major religions, and a battle of their ideologies continued for years to come. Both religions built bases of power, sending missionaries to spread their messages to the people, and constructing monuments, all in the name of winning loyalty absolute from their faithful worshippers. The balance between the Triune and Cathedral was dissolved by Lilith. Her goal to use the humans and their awakened Nephilim powers to destroy both religions. To this end, she chose a farmer named Odyssean to manipulate into removing the Triune and Cathedral from Sanctuary, and awaken the latent powers within him. As his powers grew, Odyssean amassed a following, calling themselves the Adria, which he led against the two religions, recognizing them as the source of Cajan's strife. Odyssean helped these followers to unlock their own Nephilim potentials, and the Adria turned its attention first to the Triune Temple in the city of Taraja. En route to the temple, Lucian, Mephisto's son, Grand Priest of the Triune, appeared before Odyssean as a white stallion, trying to lure Odyssean away with him. This was ultimately unsuccessful, with Odyssean and his followers attacking the demon, who then changed tactics, incinerating many of the Adria with relative ease. In the battle, Odyssean's good friend Achilles was slain, and after witnessing this, Odyssean went into a rage, his true powers awakening. Lucian then revealed his true form, but despite this was overpowered by the sheer force of Odyssean's abilities. It was only then that Lucian desperately offered his own obedience and subservience to the former farmer. Odyssean ignored the demon's pleas and imagined him to be nothing, and with that, Lucian faded away, disappearing entirely. Lilith realized she had lost control of the situation and disguised herself as her brother Lucian, traveling to the Grand Temple and attempting to take over the Triune from within. This was unsuccessful, the Triune falling into disarray in Lucian's absence. All the while, the Adria crusade continued to cut a bloody path through them, removing their bases of power from Taraja and Istani, before eventually marching on the Grand Temple itself near the capital of Cajan. Lilith had given up on her desire to control Odyssean and his followers, deciding instead to lay a trap for them, using her Morlu, ram-masked reanimated warriors, frenzied and fueled with unholy bloodlust, to defend the front, as peace warders, the warrior guards of the Triune, came from the rear. The peace warders attacked the Adria first, where the Morlu were held back as Lilith summoned a massive demon, Thonos, from below. She mocked Odyssean telepathically and offered him a chance to surrender, which Odyssean defiantly refused. Thonos was powerful and killed many on the side of the Adria. Victory seemed assured for Lilith. But then the Fallen began to rise. Mendelin, Odyssean's brother, used necromancy to raise the Adria from the dead. The recouping Adria army pushed Thonos to the brink of death, blinding the demon, and it decided to flee over the armies of Lilith, before collapsing, crushing them beneath him, as the rest of her armies were routed. She retreated into the temple, conjuring duplicates of herself to confuse Odyssean, and took on the form of a priestess. Although Odyssean saw through this, collapsing the temple on her, seemingly killing her. Rathma arrived then, with the intention of confirming her death. And he too was fooled by Lilith's deception, as she abandoned the priestess's body at the last moment. After Odyssean and his company had left, Inarius revealed himself, and that it was he who concealed Lilith's presence from Rathma, preventing their own spawn from killing her. She was stunned, and before being able to react, Inarius compressed her within a sphere. Lilith promised Odyssean would be Inarius's undoing, as she was once again banished to the void, Inarius assuring her that the flaws that allowed her to return were now gone. After this, Odyssean led the Adiram to the capital, their focus turning to the Cathedral of Light and Inarius. The cathedral's soldiers were no match for the Adiram, as even Inarius's inquisitors were easily destroyed by them, and Inarius was forced to reveal himself, descending from his tower and confronting Odyssean and his army. At first, Inarius used his overwhelming presence as an archangel to awe the Adiram and convert them to his side, a plan which Odyssean reacted quickly to, using his bond with the Adiram to fill them with confidence, halting Inarius's plan. They then unleashed their magical powers against each other before a hand-to-hand battle began. They infused their magics within themselves and mercilessly assaulted each other. Inarius, even after all this time, was still bonded to the Worldstone, which made him exponentially more powerful than he would otherwise be. Yet, Odyssean still held his own, causing Inarius to lose confidence, giving Odyssean the upper hand. As they battled on, a great tear formed in the sky, as the heavenly host burst into the world. The ripples of the great battle between Odyssean and Inarius had made them aware of sanctuary. The armies of hell then too erupted from the ground, resulting in the remaining Adiram, the angelic host, and the demons of hell engaging in a three-way battle. Inarius at this point did not care, and had the singular goal of destroying Odyssean, no matter the cost. He ignored the armies of heaven and hell entirely, as Odyssean could not, and in that moment of distraction, Inarius grabbed him, ready to strike the final blow. However, in that moment, Inarius noticed Odyssean's entire body was now infusing with energy. He was changing the very essence of the Worldstone and destroying its bond with Inarius. With his tie to the Worldstone now severed, he was drastically weakened and no longer a match for Odyssean, who easily defeated him, trapping him within a prison. With Inarius now defeated, the Adiram crushed his Cathedral of Light, as well as overcoming the Triune, and they now turned their attention to the angels and demons. Odyssean focused the whole of his powers, unleashing them in an awesome display, driving the heavenly host and demonic legions back to their domains, but at great cost. The power that he and the Adiram possessed was ripping at the very fabric of sanctuary, tearing it apart. On top of this, he realized he was losing his humanity, having gained too much power far too quickly. Odyssean knew that what happened to him could happen to others, and the potential for humanity's Nephilim powers could tear sanctuary apart. In a final act, Odyssean withdrew his Nephilim energies back into himself, and released them once more, sacrificing himself in the name of humanity, forsaking godhood, and negating his own life force, resetting the Worldstone in the process. The Nephilim powers were once again repressed, and Sanctuary was saved from certain destruction. In the aftermath of Odyssean's sacrifice, the Angiras Council came to Sanctuary to pass judgment on the young world. Ethereal and Oriel voted for humanity, with the belief that their potential to serve the light could surpass even their own, and the eternal conflict may be ended for good. Imperius voted to eradicate the humans and for Sanctuary's destruction, as their original plan had been. Malthael abstained from voting, leaving Tyrael to decide Sanctuary's fate. If he sided with Imperius, the world would be destroyed, as a tie would result in their original plan being carried out. To everyone's surprise, the Archangel of Justice voted for humanity, being swayed by Odyssean's actions, claiming no abomination would be capable of such sacrifice. So the denizens of Sanctuary were free to choose their own path, oblivious to the destruction that had been averted. Mephisto arrived at this time to settle a pact with the Council, offering to let Sanctuary be untouched by demonkind as well, to see what humanity may become, whether that be good or evil. In return for this, he sought a prize for himself and his brothers. He wanted the Archangel Inarius, who was still imprisoned and under the custody of heaven. Imperius quickly agreed to this, knowing he would have been imprisoned in heaven either way, as he had gone rogue. Tyrael was skeptical that Mephisto would fulfill his end of the pact, and required an act of proof from the Demon Lord, for him to cast his mark on the ruins of the Cathedral of Light, in order to seal the flux between worlds. Mephisto agreed, and so it was done, leaving humanity to find its own path, free from interference from angel and demon alike. With the resetting of the Worldstone through the actions of Odyssean, as well as the intervention of heaven and hell, the world of Sanctuary would enter a new age. Few on Sanctuary knew of the true events that transpired, and as time passed, the world regarded the Sin War as merely a clash of faith, and the majority of Khajan's populace turned away from religion. The land was renamed to Khagistan in the hopes of distancing itself from the conflict, and many came to turn toward the Mage Clans for guidance. In time, the Mage Clans regained the control and status they once held, the most powerful clans still being the Bestiary, the Amulet, and the Ennead. The Amulet and the Ennead declared no mage would ever summon another demon into Sanctuary, as humanity was to be kept free of angelic and demonic influence. The Bestiary, despite being under intense scrutiny, still rose to great prominence and success, and their ranks grew to include thousands of active sorcerers. At this point, they were highly popular, and as their numbers grew, so did their influence and stations. They established military outposts and other bases as far as Aranok, situated across the Twin Seas. Khagistan prospered over the past millennium, enjoying the Age of Magic, and the world of Sanctuary was relatively peaceful, until once again came the wars. The Bestiary were discovered by an infiltrator from the Ennead clan to have been performing demonic summoning rituals deep within the Ishari sanctum. This caused the Ennead and Amulet clans to hire assassins, targeting key Bestiary members, and the Bestiary retaliated similarly. Discussions within the ruling Mage Clan Council, the Al-Rakish, quickly turned violent during one heated meeting, leading to the deaths of multiple members after an intense battle. This spurred the Ennead and Amulet to launch a full-scale assault on the Bestiary main academy in the city of Vizjon. Not a single Bestiary was left alive, and the academy was completely leveled, officially starting the Mage Clan Wars. Khagistan was marked with many pockets of Bestiary, Ennead, and Amulet, and as news travelled, a full-scale war broke out throughout the kingdom. The Bestiary ruling council fled Midjourney and went into hiding, trying to consolidate their forces. Years passed, and the Bestiary were starting to feel the stress of the war, and a sole faction within their ranks resolved to create an army of demon-possessed victims. They chose a reclusive group of human tribes known as the Umbaru, who inhabited the Tarajan jungles, as their test subjects. The Bestiary gruesomely transformed Umbaru members into crazed, demonic, goat-like creatures. Though initially successful, the Bestiary had underestimated their creations. They had hoped to create mindless and loyal weapons, but the former Umbaru had more initiative than anticipated, and some of the once peaceful Umbaru had turned to all-out warfare with the Bestiary. Their culture and minds warped due to years of brutal conflict and watching their brothers and sisters twisted and turned by the vile Bestiary magic. Eventually, they began to take desperate measures, hoping to capture a mage of their own to do their bidding. To this end, they succeeded in capturing some Bestiary and turning them to their side through violent coercion, using the mages to gain control over their transformed brethren, and in some cases, to become transformed themselves, stopping at nothing to drive the Bestiary out of their lands once and for all. Their strategy worked, their willing transformations leading them to cursed powers, but also leaving them in servitude to a demon. They ravaged and raided their own and neighboring lands to sate their bloodlust and to procure victims to sacrifice to their demonic master. They became known to the remaining Umbaru as Khazra, roughly translating to demon or devil in their native tongue. Over the decades, the Bestiary Umbaru War continued, whilst the combined forces of Amulet and Ennead won major victories against isolated Bestiary groups, wiping them out before finally turning their attention to the main Bestiary force. 7 years passed, and the Bestiary had lost ground and battles against the might of the opposing clans. Hopelessly outnumbered, on the verge of defeat and annihilation, they played their trump card. Before the Amulet and Ennead could continue their assault, demons swarmed the lands, the tide of war instantly turning as the Hellspawn slaughtered them, and the Bestiary pushed back, driving them all the way back to Midjourney. Although the Bestiary now found themselves in a position of power, willing now to use demons to achieve their goals, there was a division in their ranks as to how these goals would be met. Two prominent sibling mages, Horadric and Bartok, exemplified this, the former believing demons should be bent to their will, and the latter, influenced by the demons, expressed sympathy towards them, believing an outright pact should be formed, and secrets shared freely between the demons and the Bestiary. Bartok took a leading role in the war effort, becoming known as the Warlord of Blood, bathing himself in the blood of his enemies as a ritual, and infusing him with immense powers. His armor was also empowered with demonic sentience, and demonic corruption spread through his men. Bartok's demons lacked any kind of control, destroying everything in their path, bringing great delight to him as he saw them as humankind's masters, and thought that his loyalty to them would be rewarded. Horadric realized that these actions would spell the end of civilization as they knew it, that if they won the war, only death or enslavement would be their prize. Bartok's following was substantial, and during the final stages of the war, at the Battle of Midjourney, victory seemed assured. The Bestiary Council, though, heeded Horadric's warnings and attempted to remove Bartok from command, and the siblings' philosophical differences came to a head. A civil war broke out within the Bestiary, and Bartok unleashed his forces on his own people. His hit-and-run tactics were ruthless and efficient, raiding multiple towns, causing as much destruction as possible before setting his demons upon Midjourney. They tore through wall and flesh alike, causing chaos in the now corpse-littered streets as the red haze of blood hung in the air. The Bestiary responded in kind, summoning their own demons to combat Bartok's army, but their demons turned on them, and banishment was ineffective. The lesser clans following the Bestiary saved them, stopping them from being wiped out entirely. But the battle still cost them at least a third of their number. As their battle drew to a close, Bartok issued a challenge to Horizon, who appeared at the 11th hour. They fought with all they had, destroying Midjourney in the process, killing hundreds of thousands as their magics tore the once great city apart. It was only then that the realization dawned on them that they had been fooled, and that this was the demonic legion's way into Sanctuary, and that they had reopened its gates. It was too late now to turn back, and they continued to battle fiercely until only Horizon remained, standing over the body of his dead brother, who was decapitated while casting a counterspell, his neck being the only weak point not properly covered by his powerful infused armor. Horizon ordered Bartok to be sealed away, hidden from the world, as even in death, Horizon feared his brother's vast powers. His head and body were placed in two separate, secluded, hidden caves and sealed. Destroying him was not an option, as his armor was still bound to him, protecting him even after death. Horizon grieved and was driven insane by the events that transpired, ever seeking to find a place that the Lords of Hell could not find him, terrified of the revenge they might take for his actions in the summoning and enslavement of demons. To this end, he created the Arcane Sanctuary, a place that he wished would hide him from the agents of Hell forever. The Bestiary survived, but the events of the war caused them to rethink their use of magic, and they agreed to forever outcast the use of demonology and summoning, turning instead to elemental magic. They also created the Vizjaktar, an order of mage slayers which would come to be known as assassins. Their purpose, to hunt down rogue mages, ensuring the monstrous events of the war would never take place again. Despite these actions from the Bestiary, Kyrgyzstan as a whole turned against the mage clans, and although the war was over, irreparable damage had been caused to their status, with many of their straggling members being exiled or executed. All of the Mage Clan strongholds, besides the Ishari Sanctum, were burned to the ground by the citizens of Kyrgyzstan, and the knowledge within those strongholds was lost. Laws were passed in Kyrgyzstan, abolishing the usage of magic, and a new age was ushered in. During this time, an ascetic from Xiansai claimed to have been visited by the angel Yarius, revealing to him teachings that would form the basis of Zakarum. The teachings stressed the necessity of resisting all things evil and embracing the light with total devotion. The angel had, according to Akarat, appointed him as a prophet of these teachings, instructing him to spread the word through all lands. It was later speculated that Akarat had witnessed an echo of Odyssean's sacrifice whilst in deep meditation, Yarius translating to "Son of the Light" within his language. Whichever was true, Akarat now fundamentally believed that humans were powerful vessels of light, and should seek out their inner light in order to live good lives. This philosophy spoke directly to the common man, and the people of Kurast embraced it. Disciples were sent throughout Kyrgyzstan to spread Akarat's teachings, with Akarat himself traveling to Kyrgyzstan's ancient cities, and over time, more and more disciples flocked to him. It was never Akarat's intention to create an organized religion, but wanted to spread the word of what he had found and seen so that people could live with goodness in their hearts. One day, Akarat ventured into the jungles of Kyrgyzstan and was never seen again. His teachings, though, had left a lasting impression, but would remain dormant and obscured for 1,000 years. During this period, lasting a millennia, despite conflict in Aranok across the sea from Kyrgyzstan, a relative calm permeated throughout Sanctuary, until once again, evil walked upon it. As the Sin War died down, and in the aftermath of Mephisto's deal with the Angiras Council, the Primevals still turned their attention to humanity, specifically the perversion of human souls, knowing that mankind was the key to their victory over heaven. This decision went against the normal demonic tactics and strategy, causing the lesser evils to question the primes, creating a rift between them. Mephisto, Diablo, and Baal collectively hid the existence of Sanctuary from the Lessers when they first discovered it, most likely in an attempt to fuel the fires of rebellion amongst them. Ignorant to the Primeval's plans, the lesser evils began to believe the three were afraid to continue the great war against heaven. They considered themselves to be superior to humankind, and thought the eternal conflict was their war alone, not needing the help of an inferior species. Frustrated by the ceasefire the Sin War caused to the conflict, Azmodan and Belial saw this as their chance to overthrow the Primevals and take control over the burning hells. The Lord of Lies manipulated Azmodan into open revolt against the Primes, and the two demon lords made pacts with their brethren, assuring them that humanity would not deter them from attaining victory in the eternal conflict. Endariel and Duriel doubted the other lesser evils, scared that they would fall battling the Primes. Belial, though, managed to keep them in the fold, and with Azmodan, he devised a plan to end the stalemate, achieve victory in a reignited Sin War, and bring the tidings of Armageddon to heaven, ending the eternal conflict once and for all. And with this, all four lesser evils now set in motion a great revolution against the Primevals, with all of hell waging war against the three brothers. The Primes fought ferociously, using their devastating powers together, annihilating a third of Hell's legions. But as the war drew to an end, the Primevals were overwhelmed by the Horned Death, ferocious demons led by Belial and Azmodan themselves. In their weakened state, the Primes were banished to the mortal realm, Sanctuary, to which the demons that remained loyal to the Primes fled in the hopes of finding their masters. Azmodan believed that the Primevals would create enough chaos on the mortal plane to draw the focus of heaven, thus leaving their gates defenseless for the legions of hell to march upon freely. In the war's aftermath, the bickering began. Azmodan and Belial argued over which of them held higher authority over their new kingdom, and their pact fell apart. They quickly found themselves head-to-head in another civil war, with both claiming large realms of the burning hells for their own. Meanwhile, the Primevals, now incorporeal, were free to interfere with Sanctuary at will, and unbeknownst to the lesser evils, this was their plan all along. The brothers fed upon mankind's sins and left terror, hatred, and destruction in their wake, turning friends and family against each other, and leading entire nations to brutal wars. Their hunger was insatiable, bringing suffering and anguish to all who refused to kneel before them. The lands of the east were ravaged the worst, and the brothers used their powers to occupy human hosts, such as political and religious figures, and used these hosts to manipulate and deceive the people of Kyrgyzstan. Sanctuary entered an age of evil and despair. The world underwent immense changes as demons again walked the land. These followers of the Primes wrought great destruction wherever they went, and that which was not consumed by this evil was twisted and changed. Many of the native creatures became vile, misshapen, and depraved versions of their natural forms. Sanctuary was no longer a world for mankind's development and expansion. Now, the weak would perish, and only the strongest would survive. Over the years, even before this dark time, the Archangel Tyrael, knowing that his vote saved Sanctuary's existence, occasionally travelled there in secret, walking amongst the mortals in disguise. On one such journey, he had discovered the actions of the primevals, who had at this point been twisting and subjugating mankind for decades. He was greatly concerned by this, and knew that if heaven learned of hell's perversion of man, the original plan to destroy Sanctuary might yet be carried out as Imperius intended. So Tyrael kept silent and decided to intervene on behalf of Sanctuary, alone. Tyrael crafted 3 shards from the Worldstone, and tracked down various powerful individuals from several mage clans. They were selected based purely on Tyrael's criteria and the ability he thought they had to succeed in the upcoming task. He named this group the Horadric, and gave them the 3 shards, which would be known as Soulstones, each having the ability to capture the essence of a single prime evil, and granted the Horadric the ability to track the primes down, no matter what form they had taken or which mortal shell they possessed. Once assembled, the Horadric realized they would need a powerful artifact to transport their items and assist with the hunt. Zoltan Kuhl, a member of the Horadric, to this end, designed the Cube, an immensely powerful artifact taking weeks for smiths to craft, as mages chanted incantations upon it, whilst feeling their sanity slip away. The Horadric used the cube for an extended period, and it became central to their works and actions. The survivors of its creation became increasingly haunted by its presence. The Order were aware of the dangers of corruption, and ultimately determined that continued usage of the cube was too dangerous, every member voting to abandon it, save Kuhl. The cube was then entrusted to a secret organization of barbarians on Mount Adria, tasked to keep it safe from all, including their own tribe. Weaker versions of the initial cube, named Horadric cubes, were created and used instead, to preserve important artifacts and equipment similar to its predecessor, by separating them into their component parts, making them easier to travel and to reassemble later. As the Horadric found the primes, the Soulstone's power proved much more difficult to employ, as when the primes possessed hapless mortals, they found themselves immune to the stone's effects. This forced the Horadric to kill the Demon Lord's hosts, to allow their essences to be drawn into the Soulstones. Mephisto was the first to be captured by the Horadric. They led an army against his fortress of bone, as he summoned hordes of undead to stymie them. They were nearly overpowered by the sheer number of undead, but the Horadric soldiers and mages stayed strong, eventually finding Mephisto himself around one of Kazakhstan's urban centers. Many citizens of Kazakhstan lost their lives in the ensuing battle, but eventually, the Lord of Hatred's essence was contained within the Soul Stone. After the battle, the Horadric vowed to avoid confronting a prime in a populated area, and deliberated on what to do with the stone. Tyrael, a powerful mage and leader of the Horadric, entrusted the stone to priests from the Order of Zakarum, a strong and widespread religious order formed during the Age of Faith. They sealed the stone and began building the temple city of Travancore, under which Mephisto's soulstone would lay, within the guardian tower of the Temple of Light, under constant supervision from the Zakarum priests. The Horadric then turned their attention to the remaining two prime evils, Diablo and Baal. They had journeyed across the Twin Seas to the deserts of Aranok, and the Horadric were only a few steps behind. At some point, the primes split, and Baal took up refuge in the city of Lut Golain. Tyrael believed Baal had been headed north, and waited patiently as to uphold their vow of not engaging a prime in a populated area. Three days passed before the Demon Lord moved, fleeing into the scorched desert wasteland. The Horadric were undeterred, and chased Baal relentlessly, and eventually he turned to fight the Horadric's vanguard, unleashing his powers against them. Baal's demons leapt into action against the Horadric, whilst Tyrael engaged Baal in single combat, until Kul, leading the rest of the Horadric, entered the fray. Accounts differed on what happened during the chaos, with the story holding more weight being Baal, desperate to survive the conflict, hurled a devastating spell against Tyrael and Kul as they wielded the Amber Soulstone, shattering it before escaping through a portal. Tyrael ordered Kul to lead the Horadric into the valley below, to meet up with him, and teleported after Baal, engaging him once more in single combat. The Horadric and Kul caught up to Tyrael and Baal, and the Prime was overwhelmed by the Horadric's forces. And with that, the Lord of Destruction was finally subdued. Tyrael used the largest shard of the Shattered Soulstone to trap Baal's essence, but this alone was not strong enough to contain Baal, and there was no time to obtain another Soulstone. The idea of fusing the shard with a human body was put forth, with the Horadric thinking that this may be enough to contain the essence of the demon, although it would leave the host to wrestle with it for all eternity. Tyrael immediately volunteered his body to bind Baal, and Tyrael again appeared before the Horadric, leading them to an ancient burial chamber. There, the Horadric worked quickly, and a binding stone with runes of containment was constructed. Tyrael too wasted no time, ordering his brethren to chain him to the stone. They did so, and Tyrael jammed the Soulstone shard into Tyrael's heart, sealing his fate. His fellow Horadric watched on in sadness. They left the chamber, filled with sorrow, as they sealed the tomb, departing to hunt the last of the primes. The Horadric, now led by Cain, a great mage in his own right, searched for Diablo, following his wake of terror, leading them to Konduras, where they finally found him after searching for the better part of a decade. The battle once again was furious, Diablo using all the rage, ferocity, and intensity of a prime evil, and unleashing his army of demons against the Horadric, in a battle that nearly cost all of them their lives. In the end, the Lord of Terror was defeated, his essence captured in the stone, which the Horadric hid in a labyrinthine cave system near the river Tolsund. Tyrael appeared before the Horadric one last time, commending them for their victory, and ordering that the site must be guarded for eternity. The remaining Horadric members built a small monastery and a system of catacombs within the caves, and began their watch. Over the decades, the Zakarum faith gained more and more influence, with even the Kegistani emperor, Tassara, converting to and codifying it, formalizing the teachings left by Akarat a millennium ago. He also appointed the first Q Hagen, the person who would be the highest authority within the Zakarum faith. This act helped majorly in restoring his popularity amongst his restless people, who had been banding together, rallying against the ruling elite and the Zakarum church itself. Though despite this, a handful of nobles had no intention of sharing their power, and pooled their fortunes to recruit an army of mercenaries in the hopes of crushing Tassara and the Zakarum. Tassara called upon his childhood friend and Zakarum zealot, Rakus, to crush the rebellion. A skilled tactician, Rakus outmaneuvered the mercenaries, dividing and conquering their forces with great speed and efficiency, never losing a battle against an army that outnumbered his own by a significant margin. 3 years passed, and Rakus had defeated all of the rebel forces, granting him the status of a living legend. People of all ages would flock to catch a glimpse of him as he travelled through their cities, and he used his influence to dispose of governors and magistrates whom he saw as inept, replacing them with archbishops he favoured. Rakus's deeds and status outshone the emperor's own, and Tassara grew weary of this power shift in the region, realizing that Rakus had become a legitimate threat to his rule. He acted upon this realization, turning his eyes to the west, and claiming only Rakus would be able to enlighten that dark corner of sanctuary with Zakarum faith, reasoning that if Rakus had failed, he would lose much of his popularity and clout, and if he succeeded, as emperor, Tassara could reap the benefits. Rakus accepted this task, having an ulterior motive, as he believed that the Zakarum faith was waning in the east, and travelling west would provide a means to rekindle it. Additionally, he learned from an ancient tome about the Nephilim and an ancient city of theirs known as Corvus, located somewhere across the Twin Seas, and he sought to find it. Tassara granted him a third of Kegistan's standing military, and he began his journey to the west. Rakus and his forces, dubbed the Sons of Rakus, landed in Lut Golain, and they began their crusade. The Ivgarod held sway over the northern deserts of Aranok, and they clashed with the Sons of Rakus in a series of one-sided engagements, and were easily defeated at every turn, as the forces of Rakus from Kegistan were masters of desert warfare. The Sons moved north then, through the Tamo mountain range and the northern steppes. Now in Ivgarod, they began suffering some setbacks, as Ivgarod's forests and mountains were much better suited to their style of warfare, and their monks were unleashed upon the Sons. After many intense battles, Ivgarod was severely depleted, but the Sons of Rakus were forced to turn back. In the northern steppes, similar setbacks occurred. While barbarians had lost control over much of the west, the sons were never able to conquer the northern steppes, and again turned back, regrouping at Eastgate Keep, which they constructed to guard against enemy counterattacks. Despite the setbacks in the west, the kingdom of Ensteig embraced Rakus and his teachings, and in return they were allowed to retain much of their independence, and the kingdom of Kandaras also came under the faith of Zakarum. Yet being unable to conquer Ivgorod or the barbarians left the sons' morale at a low. Rakus himself, though, was not dissuaded, and believed that victory was his destiny, rallying his men with a grand speech about their righteous cause and the destined ascendancy of Zakarum, readying his soldiers for the upcoming challenges. In the far west, 9 warring clans existed around the southern edge of what was now called the Gulf of Westmarch, and Rakus planned to use their disunity as his advantage. He knew that launching his army against them may cause them to unify, so instead he lived amongst them, learning their language, culture, and of their gods, all the while subtly spreading the Zakarum faith to anyone who would lend their ear. In time, Rakus bound himself by blood to the Ortal clan through arranged marriage. He used his new standing to bring 4 of the lesser clans under his banner. Soon after, Rakus led his combined forces against the Hathlan, the largest and most hostile clan, and after a series of gruesome, bloody battles, their leader was slain and their army dismantled. After Rakus's victory, the remaining clans pledged their allegiance to him, declaring him their king. He rallied his subjects, still preaching the Zakarum faith to them, and his message was what truly unified the clans into one single kingdom. Rakus's campaign had brought him to the westernmost point of his conquest, and thus named his new land Westmarch, and ordered the construction of the city, bearing the same name. Westmarch prospered over the next centuries, and the Zakarum faith underwent a reformation as the newly appointed Quhagan, Zebulon, aspired to bring the faith back to its humble origins after having received visions from Akarat himself. These actions were well received by the common people, despite the efforts of the Zakarum High Council acting against Zebulon, as they had slowly become corrupted by Mephisto. This reformation, in the grand scheme of things, was short-lived, as the next Quhagan, Karamat, 7 decades after Zebulon, undid his reformations, as he was manipulated by the Zakarum High Council, and launched a stricter system of worship, leading to the Zakarum Inquisition. The missionaries of Zakarum took a more hands-on approach, and the church began to purge various sects of the faith, whereas other religions were brutally suppressed and non-believers were judged as corrupt and subjected to horrific purification techniques. The Church of Zakarum launched another campaign of conversion against the West, led by a new generation of paladins known as the Hand of Zakarum. They swept through the lands, purging demonic contamination wherever they found it, and those who could not be converted were deemed evil and wiped out. As the Inquisition continued on, a group of paladins broke away from the church, condemning their methods and unwilling to continue using them. This new order of paladins claimed they should protect the innocent, and that the evil and corruption they sought to purge was rooted in their forebearers' failure. These paladins ventured further to the west, but were still outnumbered by those that remained, and their inquisition continued until eventually their momentum ended, and the movement faded away. By this time, after almost 2 centuries of work, Mephisto had succeeded in corrupting the High Council of Zakarum entirely, and he had full control over the church. the Lord of Hatred overcame the Soulstone enough to have Zakarum priests work spells to shatter it into 7 shards, which broke its mystic seal, freeing him. The Q-Hagen at this time, Khalim, proved immune to the Prime's corruption, and so Mephisto had him slain and dismembered, his body parts and organs scattered throughout Kurast. The next Q-Hagen, Sankakur, became Mephisto's host, and with the help of the corrupted council, he fashioned the compelling orb, an object used to control the Zakarum faithful, and they used their powers to conceal the lair of Mephisto. The next part in Mephisto's plan was to awaken his brother Diablo, who was still imprisoned in his soulstone beneath the Horadric monastery in Kandaras. Mephisto chose Lazarus, a once highly regarded member of the council and one of the guardians of his soulstone, to journey to Kandaras. Lazarus then convinced a devout Zakarum individual, who remained unaware of his faith's corruption, to travel there with him and acted as his archbishop. This individual was Leoric of Kyrgyzstan. Leoric brought with him his family, knights and priests, the latter groups forming his Order of the Light. Upon arrival, Lazarus insisted that the now abandoned Horadric monastery, built centuries ago, would be appropriate as Leoric's seat of power. Leoric declared himself king of Kandaras in the name of Zakarum, with the people of Kandaras being none too pleased. Leoric, though, was a just and noble man, and his subjects came to respect him for his purity of heart and deed, with the town blacksmith Griswold showing this respect by forging him a mithril sword and crown. Diablo awakened not long after Leoric's arrival, and began to enter the nightmares of Lazarus, luring him down into the dark, subterranean labyrinth. He raced through the abandoned hallways in terror, until finally reaching the chamber of Diablo's soulstone. Lazarus, no longer in control of his own actions, uttered long-forgotten words, shattering the Dark Lord's soulstone on the ground. Diablo told Lazarus, whose will was now broken entirely, of heaven, hell, the eternal conflict, and how the Primes came to be on Sanctuary. He also told Lazarus of his plans to reunite with his brothers. Although now free, Diablo was severely weakened from his dormancy within the Soulstone, and required an anchor to the world. He weighed the souls within the town above, and chose the strongest of them to possess, the soul of the king. Leoric, unaware that his seat of power was the resting place of Diablo, became convinced that a malevolent being attempted to wrest control of his mind, and at times he was seemingly unable to control his own body. For months, Leoric remained unaware, but fought against the Lord of Terror in a battle of wills, and kept his condition secret to all, believing his piety would be enough to purge himself of corruption. The king couldn't have been more wrong, as Diablo slowly stripped away the core of his being and twisted his very soul. Whatever honor and virtue he once had was shattered and dispersed. Lazarus had kept close to the king during this time in an attempt to keep the prime evil's power growing unnoticed. But as time went on, it could not be hidden, the once pure king's form becoming misshapen and deranged. His demeanor became cold and harsh, his paranoia increasing and his mind breaking. He ordered executions of any who questioned his methods or authority. The leader of his knights, Lokdanen, tried to ascertain the nature of Leoric's change of character, but Lazarus admonished his actions and chastised him at every turn, all the while whispering in Leoric's ear, convincing him that his wife, Asila, was conspiring against him. Leoric imprisoned her and eventually had her executed, her last words proclaiming her innocence and loyalty to her husband, with Lazarus asserting that she was maintaining her lies to the very end. Tensions between Lacdanan and Lazarus came to a head, with the former being accused of treason by the Archbishop, an accusation deemed ridiculous by the priests and knights of Leoric's court. This solidified the court's position against the king, and they became increasingly suspicious of Lazarus, sensing that something was off. Lazarus sought to contain the situation, and convinced Leoric that Westmarch plotted against him, wanting to annex his lands. This enraged Leoric, who summoned his advisors and in paranoia declared a state of war between the two kingdoms. His closest advisors tried to convince him that a war with Westmarch was not only unjust, but also unwinnable. But again, the whispers of Lazarus were too strong. Lacdanan, a loyal servant of the king, followed his orders and led the royal army of Kandaras to war, leaving Diablo free to assert his control over Leoric. Diablo, though, despite all of the actions taken, could still not fully control the king, as part of his will and spirit still fought him, and so he sought a new host, selecting the king's youngest son, Albrecht. Lazarus dragged the young prince down into the catacombs' depths, where he jammed a shard of the shattered soulstone into the young boy's forehead. Diablo's essence entered Albrecht, easily taking control of him, and began the process of twisting the boy's body into an approximation of his true form. The king, although now free of Diablo's grasp, was still in a maddened state, which was only made worse by the disappearance of his son. He began ordering executions of many innocent townsfolk, accusing them of the kidnapping, and his descent into madness continued with each passing day. The assault on Westmarch was a disaster for the army of Kandaras. They were outnumbered, attacking into superior defensive positions, and before long, they were being crushed. Lacdanan acted quickly, gathering those who weren't captured or killed, and retreated to Tristram, and upon returning, found the town in shambles. Lacdanan approached his king with his knights in tow, and was accused of kidnapping, Leoric ranting and raving at him before the two came to blows. Leoric set his personal guard onto Lacdanan and the returning knights, and Lacdanan begged Leoric to explain his actions, and the king simply spat at him, condemning him and his men as traitors. Lacdanan was filled with sorrow, forced to strike down Leoric, as the Black King of Tristram cursed him and his knights in his final moments. Soon after, the town began to come under siege by strange creatures, manifestations of Diablo's terror, and Lazarus re-emerged from the labyrinth. He claimed to the townsfolk that the evil within the monastery had ravaged him, and reminded them that Prince Albrecht was still missing. He convinced many of the townsfolk to enter the monastery to find the lost prince, and they threw their good judgment aside, arming themselves with torches and farm tools before following the archbishop into the cathedral's depths. Lazarus led them into a demonic ambush before disappearing deeper into the labyrinth. The townsfolk were left to fend for themselves against the demon called the Butcher, who began mercilessly carving them apart, rending and hacking their flesh with his cleaver, enjoying the satisfaction of obtaining fresh meat. Those who were still able madly fled the way they came, back through the monastery's corridors and halls until they finally reached the exit. Although they escaped, they were never quite the same. Diablo became stronger, feeding on the deaths of the townsfolk, and was now one step closer toward his goal. The Prince of Kundaras, Aiden, survived the war against Westmarch and made his way back to Tristram. He learned his father had been struck down by Lugdanen, and his younger brother had gone missing. He took stock of the situation and saw the town and townsfolk falling apart around him. He steeled himself then and vowed to save his brother and banish whatever evil had its grasp on his kingdom. Hi there. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.